I'm Krista Cloutier from The Working Artist. Thank you so much for coming. Before we begin, I wanted to thank Redwood Media, particularly my dear friend Linda Mariano, who is wonderful to work with, Eric Smith, Rick Barnett, and Bill Crumlick and his team at Crumlick Media. Thanks, guys. I wanted to find out how many of you are artists. How many artists do we have? Oh, good, good. An artist I know told me a story recently. She said when she was 8 years old, it was a family friend who was the first one to ask her that inevitable question, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She said she answered right away. She'd been waiting 8 years for somebody to ask her that question because she knew from the day she was born, "I want to be an artist." And then her mother walked over and whacked her on the side of the head and said, "Don't ever say that again. You sound pretentious." And that story broke my heart. It really made me wonder how many of us are afraid to say what we want, afraid to say who we are, afraid of sounding pretentious, or worse, pissing off our parents. Now, when I was a little girl, there was a great deal of concern about my own future. You see, I come from a family of people who have proper jobs. My people work in fields such as medicine and mathematics. My brother's a nuclear physicist, for God's sake, so I did not fit in. No one in my family could understand why I insisted on dyeing the mashed potatoes blue, or why I had to be the one to take all the family snapshots, always turning the camera at a dramatic angle and only shooting in black and white, of course. The word creative was not part of my family's lexicon, but the word strange was, and weird. So I grew up feeling wrong, feeling out of place. Now, maybe you're one of the lucky ones. Maybe your family fostered creativity and encouraged you to be an artist. But very few of us ever get to really have that kind of opportunity. How many of you grew up like me, feeling like an oddball because of your creativity? Yeah, well, don't feel bad. Our educational system, our very society itself, does not properly support creativity, does it? Now, when it came time for college, I suffered a real crisis because my family wanted me to be a nurse or to learn how to type so that I could become a secretary. They were concerned for me, and rightly so. They kept saying, "Krista, we just want you to have something to fall back on." But I didn't want to fall back. I wanted to fall forward. I wanted to stumble into life and bloody my knees and embrace every experience that life could offer. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have great confidence that there were things that I could do, but I had an idea of the kinds of experiences I wanted my life to include, and I had an idea of the kind of person I wanted to be when I grew up. And to a 17-year-old imaginative girl, there could be nothing more grand than to imagine a life that would be filled with adventures and with beauty. And the funny thing is, there still isn't. So after graduating from high school in my hometown of Phoenix, Arizona, everyone I knew went off to college, but I opted out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then some friends were going to Chicago and asked me if I wanted to come spend a summer there. That sounded like an adventure. So for the first time in my life, I said to myself, jump. I stayed in Chicago for several years because it took me that long to find the confidence to even begin to identify who I was and what I wanted to do. I mean, how many people find themselves in middle age completely miserable because they've chosen lives for themselves when they were teenagers? Especially creative people who have to overcome so many fears in order to attain their dreams, right? Fears of failure, fears of success, fears of sounding pretentious. Who here had it all figured out when they were 17 years old? Okay, just one. So statistically, it's not a good time to make life choices. Now, when I returned home to Phoenix, I began studying art history and photography at university because I'd had my adventure. Now it was time for me to chase beauty. I studied art because I wanted to learn how to look and how to see. I worked my way through school as a massage therapist. I started my own company working with professional athletes, and I had a practice in a hospital as well. Working with injured people taught me how to listen. Not only to what my patients were telling me, but what their bodies were saying and what my intuition was picking up. And I didn't realize it then, but I certainly have come to believe it today, that learning how to listen, and I mean really, really listen, is as important to an artist as learning how to see. Can I get an amen? Amen, okay. I began writing a column for a local newspaper, and it was called Church Search. And every week I would review a different church like I was reviewing a movie or a restaurant. And I gave angels instead of stars. And I wrote about things like the singing voice of the congregation or the quality of the fellowship snacks. You see, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in religions. So for me, Church Search was actually my first creative act. To find something that interested me, to learn everything I could about it, and then to share what I learned in my own voice with an audience. That's the creative act, right? It took me so many years to get through college that people were actually beginning to talk. And it's because I was one of those people who thought that everybody else was born knowing how to do things. And when they were handing out talent, somehow I had been overlooked. And it really took me until I was well into my 20s to figure out learning. But once I gave myself permission to learn, which means once I gave myself permission to be wrong, to feel awkward, to ask stupid questions, to fail, but to try again and again and again until I got it right, I fell in love with the process of learning. And all those doors that had always been closed to me were now open because I held the key. Anything I didn't know, I could learn. Let me ask you a question. Right now, are you letting not knowing something stop you? Because if so, I encourage you to learn. Those resources are very much available. Now, in those days, I aspired to be a writer and a photographer, and I wanted to teach. The plan was to go to graduate school and to get my master's degree in fine art photography. But when was the last time life went according to plan, right? Before submitting my application to graduate school, I met with a member of the graduate school selection committee, and I married him, thus ending my dream of getting a master's in fine art photography. He's a lovely man, though we are no longer married, but the point of the story is this. In life, we find ourselves at this place that I poetically refer to as point A. And something speaks to you. You hear something. You see something. Call it inspiration. Whatever. Something whispers to your heart. Point B. That's what you really want. Point B. And somehow we have this belief that we're meant to go directly from point A to point B. Just like that. Don't stop. Don't pass go. And anything short of this is failure. But in real life, it's like a labyrinth, isn't it? And the road from point A to point B twists, it turns, sometimes it dead ends, sometimes point B seems so far away, you don't think you'll ever get there, or you just got too far away from it. But the truth is, if you stay true to yourself, by which I mean, if you will connect with that voice that whispered point B to you in the first place, you will find that the cliche is true. Everything you need to reach your dreams is given to you on your journey. So don't be dissing your journey. You're not too old, you're not too young, you're not too rich, you're not too thin, too poor, you're not too fat, you're not too thin, you're not too anything. And whatever it is you are identifying right now as your weakness, is really where your power is. So own it. Now, where was I? Oh, that's right. My dreams of a master's degree, dashed by my impetuous marriage. I decided instead I'd get my master's degree in religious studies, the academic study of the world's religions. Now, my poor family could barely handle my massage therapy certification. True story, they thought I was being certified as a prostitute. They were even more mortified by the arts degrees. And now they thought I was joining a cult. But it wasn't like that. Like I said, I've always been fascinated by religions. I wanted to know about the big questions in life. I wanted to know how other people had answered those questions. I wanted to know how those answers brought people together, how those answers tore people apart. I wanted to learn how to answer those questions for myself. I wanted to learn how to think. And I wanted all of this to feed my work as an artist. What feeds your work as an artist? When I finished graduate school, I found myself in need of a job. Because believe it or not, and this might come as a surprise to you, it did to me, but there are no headhunters out there actively looking for someone with degrees in art history, photography, and religious studies who happens to give one hell of a back rub. It turns out I was overeducated and I was qualified for nothing outside of really, really good dinner party conversation. But it was at just such a dinner party that I met a man named Joe Segura, who was the founder of Segura Art Studios, a fine art print press with a national reputation for the quality of the artists they worked with. I told Joe that I needed a job, and he asked me if I knew anything about printmaking. Printmaking. Printmaking, 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 printmaking. Yes, I said, I love printmaking. I printmake every day. And then I went to the library and I got a book and figured out what printmaking was. Well, he hired me as a part-time assistant to the manager, which is basically a glorified internship. I didn't know anything about selling art, but it turns out that was my secret superpower. And within a year, I had worked my way up through the ranks and was director of the whole company, which was a position that I held until just a few years ago. Now, most people don't know what a fine art print press is. It's what they used to call an atelier, a large studio where printers, who are highly skilled craftspeople, make art. Lithographs, etchings, photographs, and other works on paper in collaboration with artists. The printers facilitate the artist's ideas. Is that me making that noise? Okay, he's working on it. So these weren't posters, they weren't reproductions, they weren't giclées. They're original images that the artist drew in our studio on a slab of cool limestone or etched with a fine point into a highly polished copper plate. And then these would run through a press and printed in small editions, multiple originals, if you will. So we had a large studio with etching presses, lithography presses, a photolithography press, and a darkroom that looked like a mad scientist lab where we specialized in arcane 19th century photographic processes. That's right, it was pretty cool. But don't make the mistake of thinking you have to have a cool space in order to be an artist. I know world famous artists who still work at their kitchen table. Real art comes from here and here. Never let lack stop you. So artists work with us, by and large, by invitation only. So I would research artists, and if their interest and their aesthetic mirrored ours, I would invite them in to collaborate with us. Now, at Segura Art Studio, artists worked with us, by and large, by invitation only. So I'd research artists, and if their interest and their aesthetic mirrored ours, I would invite them in to collaborate with us. At Segura Art, our interest was mainly political art, with an emphasis on working with minority artists. But through Segura Press, I was able to work with some of the biggest names showing in contemporary art today. I went into their studios and learned their work practices. I knew exactly how they ran their business. So I've worked with many artists at all different levels of their career. And every year I would also try to identify one young artist and introduce their work to the marketplace. So I'm going to show you some of the work that came out of Segura Art Studios when I was there. You might not like all of it. You might not like any of it. We had a very certain mission and a certain aesthetic going on, so that's okay. But I'll give you a few stories here. This is an artist named Kate Brakey, who's an Australian artist. She's known primarily for a series she has called Small Deaths. She photographs birds and animals and flowers that she finds that have died, those small deaths that we pass every day. She photographs them with a Hasselblad, so they're massive. She sepia tones them, and then she hand paints the color inside. And I think they're lovely. This is a woman, an African-American artist named Elizabeth Catlett, who was already in her 90s when we worked with her. Elizabeth Catlett was living in Mexico City at the time, and sometimes when artists were either too busy or, in her case, too fragile to travel, we would pack up a studio, a print studio, and we would go to them. So my printer went to go work with her, and we thought because of, you know, her age, she was frail, and also she just had operations on each of her wrists. But she still wanted to make prints, so we thought linoleum cuts would be easier for her without hurting herself too much. And my printer offered to go in on the negative spaces and take out some of the linoleum for her. And she said, no, young man, why would I have you do something I can do for myself? And then after the prints were made and she was signing them and we were moving them from place to place, she stopped. No, why would I have you do something I could do for myself? This is a lesson I come up with again and again with artists. This is how self-sufficient we are and really willing to do the work. This is an artist from El Salvador named Roberto Paizo. You can't see the size on these, but it's a triptych, and each one is 47 inches tall. So these are massive. So Roberto Paizo was living in El Salvador during the time when people were just disappearing off the street, and the government was saying, we don't know what happened to him. We don't believe you. We don't think people are disappearing. But one day his brother-in-law disappeared. So he joined other people in the city who would go outside the city and look through body dumps, basically, looking for his relative. And he could see that all of these people had been tortured. And he was having nightmares about it. So because he's an artist, he started to draw and draw and draw. And this is a series of prints that he made about what was happening in his country. I posted this on the website. He came and gave a talk, and I posted some of the notes, and it was actually several years later I got a call from him, and he said, take it down. Take it down at once. My family's had to flee the country. There are soldiers at my door right now with AK-47s, and they want this taken off the internet. That's the power of art. I was really honored to work with Philip Perlstein, the foremost American figurative artist, and Vic Muniz. I don't know if you have seen the film, the Oscar-nominated film Wasteland. It's a documentary about his work. If you haven't seen it, I really, really urge you to watch Wasteland. One reason artists like to work with us at Segura was because they would have an idea, and we would say yes. We never said no. So Vic had an idea that he wanted to make a 19th century stereo opticon viewer for his images, and we said yes. We make stereo opticon viewers every day. And then we figured out how to make a stereo opticon viewer, and we made this beautiful box and a great set of prints. Judy Chicago is a well-known name in the history of art. She's the foremost feminist artist in America. So when Judy came to work with us, she brought an idea for a project that was so complex that there was no way we could do it all at once. We had to divide it into 3 weeks off, then 3 weeks in the studio again. We also had to completely reinvent printmaking because what she saw in our head, there was really no technique for. So we had to make up a technique. And she had to do everything backwards, not just left to right, but light to dark as well. So it was a very, very grueling project. So here's Judy Chicago in her mid-60s. She would go to the gym for 2 hours every morning. She'd roll into the studio at about 10 a.m. She had us raise all the tables, so she never sat down. She'd work through lunch, she'd work through dinner, and she'd finish at about 8 for 3 solid weeks. I hired an intern to help her. And by the end of the week, I realized I had like a whole team of interns because she was just wiping them out. And this is another lesson that I've learned from very successful artists. I mean, that's not a pace that she could keep forever. But when the work demands it, I've never heard an artist complain. They step up and they do it. Faith Ringgold is an African-American artist who's known for her beautiful story quilts. And James Turrell, one of my favorite artists, he is the creator of the Rodin Crater. It's an incredible land art project in northern Arizona. I don't use the word genius very often. I don't really believe in it, but I do believe we have a modern day Leonardo da Vinci in James Turrell. He's absolutely brilliant. And William Wegman, everybody's favorite photographer. When I met the Weimaraners, I screamed like I was seeing Elvis. I was such a big fan. And this is one of the young artists whose work we brought to the marketplace. I saw Ian Van Coller's work, and I was so taken by it. He makes these beautiful photogravures, and he photographs plants or animals from his native South Africa. And then underneath, he prints the black South African description next to the white South African description. And with the black South African description, he would get from a medicine, like a witch doctor, I guess, for lack of a better word. So, like this particular piece, if you put it under, a pregnant woman puts it under her pillow, it guarantees that she'll have a safe delivery. But the white South African description is very scientific. And I just thought it was a really beautiful way to talk about the clash between the two cultures, that we see the world completely differently. Now, after the prints were created, I sold the work, and since this was how we made our money, it was the most important part of my job. I sold art to museums, to galleries, and to collectors throughout the world. Everywhere from blue-chip galleries to mom-and-pop frame shops, from traditional institutions to funky pop-ups, and everything in between. And then we opened an in-house gallery where I started to selling art to the public too. I had to create a unique marketing campaign and find a new audience for every single thing that I sold. And I was constantly introducing new work to the marketplace. And because I controlled the prices of the work I represented, I became certified as a fine art appraiser as well. So I didn't even realize it then how much value this had. But my years at Segura Art really gave me an incredibly privileged education and a real in-depth understanding of exactly how all aspects of the art world work, from every player's point of view and pretty much every price point. So in addition to running the press and selling art, we started to become interested in making documentary films. We wanted to make films that answer the question, where do ideas for art come from? And I'm very proud to be a producer of the film Pasa un Angel, The Art of Klaudia Bernardi. Our film took the top honors at San Francisco International Film Festival. It was invited to screens all over the world, including the United Nations, and was also invited to contend for an Academy Award. It was such a thrill, and it really got me starting to think about maybe chasing my own creative projects. But, you know, hey, I had a big life. I had a big career. I had a big studio and a big office. I drove a big company car. I lived in a big house with a big yard for my big dog. I had closets full of little black dresses that I wore to all the openings and the parties I was going to. I traveled all the time. I was hobnobbing with artists. Sometimes I was in the newspaper or on TV. So I was working with incredible people on significant projects that had a great deal of meaning for me. And I think as artists, that's really what we're searching for, isn't it? So when I started to find myself feeling unhappy, I figured I must be wrong. I can't be unhappy. And then one day I was having a cup of coffee with a friend, and he was complaining about his job, as you do. But to be honest, I was feeling it too. I'd been doing the same thing for a long time. I will never forget his exact words. He said, "Don't days like today just make you wish you could sell everything you own and move to the south of France?" And something inside of me screamed, "Jump." So I did. I left my job, sold all of my possessions, all the little black dresses, my art collection, my books, my furniture, the knickknacks, the bric-a-brac, the whatnot. I sold everything I owned. I sold everything I owned. And I stripped my life down to just a couple of suitcases. And I moved by myself to the middle of nowhere in the French countryside in the dead of winter. And I don't speak French. This Arizona city girl found herself in a place that was freezing cold with nothing but a fireplace and a bottle of wine to keep me warm. I'm from Arizona. I'd never lit a fire in my life. I thought they turned off and on with a switch. It took me weeks to get out of the fetal position and stop sobbing. I was certain that I had just destroyed my entire life on some stupid whim. In a really pathetic attempt to have a conversation with another human being, I started to write a diary. And then that turned into essays, and then that turned into short stories, and then pretty soon, I couldn't stop writing. And every day I would venture out into the countryside and I'd pick up my camera before I go. When was the last time I had ever picked up a camera? Suddenly, the world began to open up to me in a whole new way. And it spoke to me. It said, "Follow this." So I jumped. And when it came time to leave France, I decided not to come back to America, but to start over where nobody would know me as a writer and photographer in England. Hello, England. I'm Krista Cloutier. I'm here. I'm ready. Yeah, right. Let me tell you something. Starting over in a foreign country when you're not 20 years old, where no one has ever heard of you, couldn't care less who you know, what you've done, or that you were once on television in Phoenix, Arizona, at a time that the world is suffering from an economic meltdown of epic proportions, while starting over in a field that you don't have a whole lot of experience, and it is notoriously competitive, it's not highly recommended as a career step. For the first time in my life, I wished that I was a nurse or that I knew how to type. But I believe in turning weaknesses into strengths. So nobody wanted to know me. That was fine. That meant I had no distractions. I put my head down and I wrote. I wrote all day. I wrote every day for a couple of years. It's called perfecting your craft. And every artist can tell you there are no shortcuts. I committed to submitting work every single day. And twice a day I would receive a rejection, which seemed mathematically impossible. But that's how the life of an artist feels when you're starting out. I did some good work. I did a lot of bad work. But you know what? I got better. And slowly, I started to get my work published. This was fun. I put writer on my LinkedIn profile, and someone contacted me in England and said, "Oh, are you a copywriter?" Copywriter, yes. I love to copyright every day. So I got this gig. They were coming out with a new vodka, and they asked me to write an ad for it. I was golden. Do you know how much money copywriters make? I thought, I'll be a copywriter. Absolutely. Let's do it. I wrote it. The owner of the company liked it so much that he bought double-page spreads in all the major London newspapers. My career was set. I was going to be a copywriter. And then 3 days before the ads ran, he was arrested for tax fraud, and the world will never know what a great copywriter it lost. But we will, won't we? We'll know. It takes a long time for an artist to find her voice, and it takes even longer to develop it. But I truly believe that it is always there if you are willing to do the work. Pavarotti has this great quote. He said, "People think I'm disciplined, but it's not discipline. It's devotion." There's a great difference. I had always missed writing those church reviews that I had done during college. And I looked around England and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to do something like this in The Guardian, the British newspaper The Guardian? So that was my dream. And then I started traveling around England, visiting different churches and writing about them, for fun, because I'm weird that way. And because people do notice when a foreigner is sitting in their church taking notes and asking strange questions, I became a little bit known on the British church circuit. That led to an invitation to sit in the audience of a TV show called The Big Questions. On the panel that day was an editor from The Guardian. So when the taping of the show was over, I jumped backstage. I followed him. He went into the men's room. True story. I went after him. I blocked his exit. I gave him my card. I gave him my pitch. He didn't stand a chance. Within a week, I started publishing my work in the pages of The Guardian. And you know what people said? You're so lucky. Luck. Luck. Tell that to the girl who's been sitting in a basement for 2 years, getting rejection after rejection. Thomas Edison defines luck as opportunity meeting preparation. There's really no such thing as luck. You've got to be ready for your opportunities. You've got to hone your skills until they are razor sharp. You've got to have all of your materials ready to go at a moment's notice. You've got to be tenacious about chasing opportunities, and you've got to be audacious when you find one. A lot of artists hate to hear this, but it's true. Anyone can have a good idea. Anyone can do good work. It's the so-called lucky ones, the ones who have prepared, that get to make things happen. The life of an expat writer is a lonely one. And a friend suggested that I begin teaching workshops for artists, sharing what I learned from my years in the business. So I went to a gallery in London and said, I teach workshops every day. And I got the gig. But from the first time I stepped in front of a classroom, I knew that this is where I was born to be, using my professional experiences to help other artists create their own. Let me make this clear. I have never put an untrue word on my resume, and I am not advising that you do either. The point I'm trying to make is don't wait until you feel ready to jump, because you could be waiting forever. Just jump and flap your wings like crazy until you start to fly. It took me years to get it off the ground, but 3 years ago, I launched The Working Artist as a comprehensive online business school for artists of all media. And today I've already reached artists in over 45 different countries. The Working Artist has helped aspiring artists to take their first steps toward being professional, and established artists kickstart their careers to the next level. Being an artist is about craft and voice, yes, but it's also about stepping up and taking responsibility for your work. It's about owning who you are and learning how to lean into the hard stuff. It's not about being someone else. It's not about doing things that make you uncomfortable, but about creating a career that's truly authentic and making it work for you. Today, I'm proud to say I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, and I'm a teacher, which is exactly what I said I wanted to do at the beginning of this journey, but I'm doing it in a completely different context than anything I could have ever imagined for myself back then, or had I simply gone from A to B like I thought that I was supposed to. Now I'm a creative nomad. I live all over the world. I always have several projects going on at any one time. I'm using my photographs and my writing to build a business that both sustains me and helps others to create their own professional opportunities. I'm working with incredible people on significant projects that have a great deal of meaning for me. You know, the art world is small, but opportunities for artists are massive right now, especially because creativity is at the forefront of the global conversation. This really is a wonderful time to be an artist. Before I wrap up, I want to give you some of the takeaways I want you to remember from this talk. Creative people have to constantly battle fears. It's not just you. Learning to listen is as important as learning to see. And when you listen, remember, it always speaks in a whisper, so trust it. Trust that whisper. I can't even read that. Artists never stop the process of learning. Embrace, there you go. Yeah, thank you. The road to your dreams is never direct, so don't give up. This is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be difficult, because everything you need to reach your goal is found on your journey. Those things that you see as your weakness right now, that's where your power is. You can make art anywhere, out of anything. Never, ever, ever let lack stop you. It takes time to find your voice, and it takes longer to develop it. In fact, I don't think that artists ever stop growing and learning. There are no shortcuts in perfecting your craft. Listen, taking that leap, shedding my skin, and selling all my stuff was by far the most difficult thing I have ever done. And I wish that I could tell you that I handled it with grace and great aplomb. Mostly, it was a lot of plum. But I will tell you this, I have never looked back. Because when artists fall, we fall forward. So what are you waiting for? Jump. 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 Well, I thank you so much, and I'll be standing right up here if you want to come say hello. Give me your business card. Drop off your little sign-up sheet. Thank you, everyone, so much.